Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Houston, this is Station. We are ready.
Washington Post, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call Station for a voice check.
Station, this is Chris Davenport with the Washington Post. How do you hear me?
Hello, Chris. Station has you loud and clear. Welcome aboard.
Thanks so much for taking the time, guys. I really appreciate it. The purpose of the interview is to get a sense of what going to space and living in space is really like. We've talked to a number of astronauts about it, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. And I thought I'd start with, today, what you're doing today, specifically, at least at first, how did you wake up this morning? Did you have the music playing? What was the song that woke you up? What did you have for breakfast?
Well, actually, I had an interesting morning. I woke up a little earlier than normal at 5 a.m. because I reset a lighting timer on our veggie facility, which is kind of our garden in space where we grow plants. And currently, we're actually doing an experiment in that facility that has algae. So I had a little bit of an unusual wake up this morning. Unfortunately, there was no music at 5 a.m., but it was nice to wake up with a purpose, and I took care of that. And then just ended up doing a couple of extra personal things before the rest of the station woke up this morning.
Nick, how about you?
Yeah, Chris, the days up here, I think, in terms of like a schedule, the work days are fairly long. So it starts with the morning conference at 7:30 in the morning usually, and that's when it was today, and it'll end around 7:30 at night. The schedule for me today started out with exercise. So a few tasks for some payloads beforehand for a few minutes, but then a couple hours of exercise to kind of counteract all the negative effects of floating around in microgravity. It's fun to do flips and twists and play with your food, but it takes its toll on your body unless you are constantly on top of things and working out.
And just some details. Was there a song this morning, and what did you have for breakfast?
Sure. This morning I had some granola and some Mexican scrambled eggs with a little bit of coffee with some cream. And we all can set our own alarms. I don't have an alarm that plays music. We don't use a song to wake up the entire station the same way that the shuttle did.
And just sort of curious, right before this phone call, what were you doing, and what do you have scheduled right afterwards?
Right before this phone call, I was actually conducting a medical conference with my doctors on the ground in Houston. So that's something that we do weekly. We check in with our doctors to make sure that, everything is running well. And that is scheduled regardless of whether or not we have something to talk about. So it's a good opportunity to talk through things. Talking about the morning, I had a fun opportunity because tomorrow is a Russian EVA or spacewalk day. And so my first activity of the day was actually working with the Russian crew members and going over the procedures for the day tomorrow. So a little bit of morning fun there. I brought coffee down to our Russian cosmonaut crew, and we had coffee together and talked through what we're going to be doing tomorrow. It's a very important day for all of us.
And Nick,
part of prepping for this, right before I was talking to you, I was getting this set up because we don't normally have the sound stage set up. So I had to make sure that we did scene and voice checks, and that you were going to be able to see and talk with us. Immediately following, I'm going to start into day 2 of 3 of running a power cable for a new water storage system that we're putting into the laboratory. Where over the course of 3 days, we're in and out of behind almost every equipment rack that we have in the laboratory, the U.S. laboratory.
And now that you've been up there for, I guess, a little over 2 months, I'm wondering, are you feeling more comfortable? Is it more familiar? I mean, when you first got there, did you have problems, floating at first? Were you bumping into stuff? Did you get sick? How's your body adapting?
Nick's laughing, saying we still do bump into things, but no, absolutely. There's been a huge learning curve. I would say that the first week is just learning how to do the very most basic life functions. You're learning how you eat in space. You're learning how to exercise here, how to call home, just the very, very basics, because everything is a little bit different here. And then you sort of move into the next phase, which is where you learn how to do your job more efficiently. And now I think Nick and I have both I've noticed we're in a phase where we hopefully have learned how to be more efficient with our day-to-day tasking, but now we're looking at finding ways to further improve, continuous improvement of station, ways to make the way the place runs more efficient. So we're finally asserting kind of our own influence on things, and that's been fun to watch as well.
And Nick, I wonder, one of the things I noticed you tweeted about the calluses on your feet. That seemed like one of the significant adaptations. What is it like, and how did those form?
They form through pain, Chris. So, you know, you continually wash up here, and so slowly the dead skin off the bottom of your feet goes away, and they become fairly smooth. But we're constantly hooking our toes underneath handrails here to hold us down, just like we are right now. I've got my feet underneath a handrail. And because I'm hooking up with my toe, the top of my big toe is in constant contact throughout the day with these hard metal handrails. And so slowly the tendon on top of my toe, has gone through spurts of pain as it's adjusting to all of this, and the skin has started to thicken on top, and everything started to adapt. But it's taken a good, I'd say, 2 months to get to that point.
Was that a surprise to you that you would be using your feet so much and they would develop calluses?
Yeah, I'd heard former flyers talk about this, veterans talk about this. That's just one of the things. Growing, I grew a couple inches. Just all of these different things that your body responds to space. They're all new experiences for you. So even though they're coming, they kind of catch you by a little bit of a surprise, because you don't know if it's exactly what's happening, and so you're figuring it all out on the fly. And that's part of I think the magic of being up here for a long period of time, is just appreciating what your body's going through, physically as well as mentally. I was thinking the other day that it's taken me to about this point in the mission, and I think we're about just over 70 days into our mission. It's taken me up to this point to get to the point where I expect things to float. Before this, I'd be surprised, intermittently surprised when something would float in front of me. But now the expectation is that everything is floating, and I'm not shocked when something doesn't fall. And it turns out to be pretty handy when you're trying to look for things that have floated away. You've got a second sense about where to look now.
Christina, I wonder if you might comment on that. Have you adapted similarly? Has it taken about the same amount of time?
Yep, I have the exact same experience as Nick. It's interesting to see how all the things we've been told about for the last 5 years actually end up happening to us, and how sort of our own experience matches that of what we've heard in the past. Because, of course, when you hear about things from a lot of different people, it's hard to imagine that it's ever going to happen. And you have a certain level of expectation, but then you also adapt in the moment to how the reality of it. So in terms of expecting things to float, yes, I've finally gotten used to what we call temp stowing something in the air. So when I have my hands full and I'm still searching for something, a bit of stowage or an item, I've learned now that I can just float it in the air in front of me, and that can free up a hand. But I've also learned to not let it float for too long in case it gets away. So, we're finally getting used to that. I find now that when I watch TV shows, I will actually be surprised when things don't float as I'm watching something. So it's funny to see how your mind starts to accept a new norm.
For both of you, has there been a memory or a day that's really stood out to you on your mission so far? I mean, the sort of one thing that's stood out for whatever reason.
So I think they're going to say launch day.
I would say for myself, I'll go with the day that I got to do a spacewalk. Not only was it professionally just an incredible opportunity to be a steward of this amazing space station and to keep it running optimally and to be a part of that process, but even on the professional, personal level, just to see something come together that felt like a culmination of my career and my own interests, and even my hobbies in a way, to see the 5 years of training that the team helped me out with finally get put to use and to give back. And on top of that, the actual environment you're in is so amazing. So to know that behind your visor, across from your visor, is the vacuum of space, and to look down and not only see your crewmate, but behind your crewmate to see the Earth rotating, and to be a part of this engineering marvel that we live on, all that coming together in one day is completely unforgettable, and I will definitely remember it forever.
Chris, for me, every day, like I completely agree with Christina, every day up here is special. But I got to say, so my first attempt to get to the space station didn't go so well. And so actually launching successfully, docking with the space station and floating through that hatchway was such a huge sense of relief and accomplishment. And it's just something that I'll never forget.
And I guess for both of you, but maybe Christina first, since your time has been extended, how do you track the days? I mean, it seemed like you knew you were at 70 days today or thereabouts. I mean, do you actually count them down? Do you keep a calendar and cross them off? How do you have like a little notepad with the, and writing down each number? How do you track that, or don't you?
I actually don't track separately, other than knowing when I get to open a new special menu item food container. That is actually, I would say, the closest thing that I come to marking time. We have a food system here where we have both a standard menu and then some things that we pick of our own, but we're limited to how many of those we have, and we can only open them after so many days. So I don't count days. I've done a lot of different deployments, if you will, and seasonal work in different remote places, and I've never been someone that counts to days. I find that I like to focus on not so much what I don't have up here and counting down until I get all that again, but I like to focus on the things I'll never have again, the unique aspects of wherever I'm at. So I usually don't necessarily count down, but you could say maybe I count up. I think it's sometimes just knowing a little bit of perspective on how much you have accomplished and what you have to go helps you sort of realize how far you've come and realize anticipate where you may be in a few months, and in that way you can kind of help make yourself more efficient, make yourself challenged in new ways if that needs to happen. But no, I don't have a countdown calendar.
So, Chris, everybody's got their different approach. I think we probably have different approaches here, but it's for the same purpose. So I've got a watch, and it tells me how many days have elapsed on the mission, and I know the total mission duration. And I use it, for me, as a reminder of the time that I have remaining and just trying to make the most of that time.
And Nick, you have two boys, I think. Have you talked to them from station, and what did they ask you about your time up there?
Yeah, so an amazing aspect of the life on the space station is the amount of connectivity that we have with the ground and the ability to make a phone call to family and speak with them, and then the psychological support team that we have and them helping facilitate each week video teleconferences with our family. So we have pretty routine contact to family. So I talk with Katie and the boys all the time. And, at first they ask me all those things that you would expect to ask about space. They want to see me float. They want to see me do flips and tricks and play with food. They want a tour of the space station. Now we're back to conversations where, hey, it's Dad. And we talk about what's going on in their life and what's going on in my life, just like we would be sitting around the dinner table at home talking about those same things.
Great. I know we only have maybe a minute or two left, so I guess we can make this the last one. But there's talk, particularly with a commercial crew program and just everything that's going on in space today, of having civilians go to space, either on suborbital trips or orbital trips. I'm just sort of curious, if a civilian was to go or someone like me, what advice you would give. I mean, I realize that's probably a much longer conversation, and maybe one day we could have that. But, in the time we have, I wonder if there's just a gem or two that you'd offer.
I would offer that the important thing is to take it all in and to remain flexible and adaptable. So coming into it without a set of expectations, but being ready to, accept and to really get the most out of whatever you find that adventure were to be for you.
I guess we do have a couple minutes, so I want to ask you, too, about the view. How much time of your day you spend looking at it? Are you at the point where you can actually see out the window and kind of know almost instantaneously where you are in relation to the Earth?
Yeah, so to be honest, I don't get the opportunity to look out the window as much as I would like to. Because we are pretty busy up here. But we do have that opportunity in the cupola. You can also see two windows behind us, these portals that we have in the gym, the Japanese experiment module. They provide us a great view of the Earth. And so you can see the Earth glide by below, and I'm becoming more familiar with the continents and being able to identify it. But even at the altitude of 250 miles, you see a small enough footprint of the Earth that it can sometimes be difficult to identify exactly where you're over. But features like Florida, the panhandle of Florida, or seeing Cape Cod, those are very distinct coastline features that are very easy to pick out.
And Christina, if you could take that as well, I'd appreciate it in terms of the view.
Sure thing. I would echo everything Nick said. We do work long hours here, which of course is our mission, and we're happy to do that. And so there's always that desire to keep looking out the window, which we do in our free time. One interesting thing that I've come to realize in being here and having time to look at the Earth is how small the area that I'm familiar with from my time on the Earth is compared to the entire area of the Earth. So very rarely are we actually flying over a place that I have lived or that I know well. And more often we're flying over a place that I don't know well or that's unfamiliar to me, unexplored territory. And it's really just brought the perspective of how big the Earth is and how special those places are that I have spent time. So that's been a new perspective that I've gained from being able to look at the Earth from this vantage point.
I wonder, too, how the sleeping is going in micro-G. Are you finding it easier or harder? Did that take some time to adapt to?
For me personally, I find it very easy to sleep here. It's very peaceful because you are just floating in a sleeping bag that's attached to the wall. So it does take a little bit of getting used to that you're not actually laying down somewhere. You at first have to sort of tell yourself, okay, it's time to go to sleep now, because really the only difference between when you actually start the process of trying to go to sleep versus just floating there like you were moments before is closing your eyes. So as opposed to crawling in bed and, putting the covers on, that's really all you have is just shut your eyes and call it a day.
And Chris, for me, it's very similar. It just feels very natural to zip up that sleeping bag. Mine actually is a little small, so it's pretty snug, and so it really feels like I'm just covered up in blankets. And with all the lights out, it's very difficult for me to tell that I'm not just laying in a bed. And my body goes to the natural position it wants to, so there's no tossing and turning, and I get a solid night's sleep. The only time I really ever struggled sleeping was the first 2 weeks of adapting up here, where my spine was really stretching out. And so throughout the night, back pains would force me to get up and stretch. And once I got through that period, I've slept like a baby up here.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for the time. I really appreciate it, and best of luck to you.
Thank you, Chris. We really enjoyed our time with you.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, Christina, and the Washington Post. Station, we are now resuming operational audio communication.